Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever applies best to you, and welcome to the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub webinar series on mentorship in registered apprenticeship. I am typically joined for these series by Dr. Kimberly Harris, our subject matter expert in DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. I myself am a subject matter around concerns related to veterans and other folks with what we would call barriers to employment and opportunity. This is our second session in our Mentorship and Registered Apprenticeship series. This is really going to look at mentorship program design. Of course, you heard in our first session, Dr. Harris talked in great detail about the different pieces that we want to be thinking about as we're first establishing a mentorship program and as we're reviewing our existing programs to say, is this doing everything it can to open the doors of our employers of our program as wide as they can be, and to ensure that when folks come through those doors, they are not only welcomed, but there's a genuine sense of belonging that is cultivated in that process. So Dr. Harris spoke about all that quite a bit, and we're just going to add some details here about the elements that we consider as we're considering our design of these programs, and then what the implications for that will be in terms of how we think about the evaluation that, of course, accompanies all this, our process of understanding the effectiveness and the impact of this mentorship program, as part of course, the effectiveness and impact of our overall registered apprenticeship program. So today, what we're going to be talking about, again, is sort of looking, again, at what are some of those program elements that we'd want to consider based on both the needs of our program, the needs of the overall registered apprenticeship program, and of course, based on the needs of the participants, both the participants who we've engaged already and the participants who we hope to engage in the future. Of course, we always want to be thinking about what's next. Again, how do we push that door a little further, a little wider open, and how do we ensure that folks are going to be able to come through that door, be served, be welcomed, and able to cultivate a genuine sense of belonging within our program, within our employment. Again, we're going to be correlating those elements to participant needs and how we think about those. And finally, we're going to be looking at how we capture the effectiveness of these elements in the evaluation that we'll conduct, in the way we consider the effectiveness and the impact of everything that we are doing in our registered apprenticeship and mentorship programs. So to begin with, this is kind of a coy way to phrase it, but of course we ask, why mentorship? What is the purpose of this? We always want to be thinking, why do we want to have this element within our registered apprenticeship programs? Of course, we know mentorship is more or less ubiquitous within registered apprenticeship programs. It's always there. It's always an essential element. And we understand that has impacts both on how folks learn and how folks are retained and engaged within these programs. However, we, beyond thinking on that sort of higher level, like, well, why do we do this? Why is this such an effective program element? We want to think specifically for ourselves, for our program, for our goals, for the folks that we're serving, for the folks that we're engaging, for the employers that we're working with. What are the specific goals we want to be considering, and how does that impact the way we are thinking about our evaluation, the way we're thinking about our program design? So, our first thing here, our first question, as we dig a little bit deeper into that why mentorship question, are what are the specific goals that we have in developing a mentorship program? And again, this may sound a trifle coy because I think we've talked about these elements, and I think we all have a pretty good understanding of these because mentorship is such a key piece within the registered apprenticeship programs. But I think we want to dig a little deeper, and we're going to just kind of pause and consider these pieces as we're considering how all this fits together. Now, and when we think about those goals, here are some examples. And again, there's no, I should make very clear, it's not like we need to pick one or two of these. We can cultivate all of these, but we need to do so, as Dr. Harris was talking about in our last session, we need to do so with intentionality. And we need to think, okay, if these are our goals, if this is why we're doing this, how does that impact both the way we design this program and the way we'll end up evaluating it? So as you think about these goals, we kind of aligned this list from those that are what we would call most common to registered apprenticeship programs to ones that might that maybe we haven't considered before, but which are very much a part of what we can think of a mentorship program possibly achieving. So of course we think of, first and foremost, program retention. We think of, okay, if someone might be facing some challenges coming into this workplace, coming into this apprenticeship, going into potentially classroom learning, the training and certification element of our registered apprenticeship program, we know there are a number of areas where someone might struggle to adjust, adapt, where someone might face some challenges in terms of how they engage with these programs. Well, one of the first things we think about in terms of a goal of mentorship is to support that notion of program retention, to give someone someone that they can, to give a mentee, to give a registered apprenticeship program participant, someone they can talk to, someone they can seek advice from, someone they can seek reassurance from, someone they can seek support from, someone that on a very simple level they can just talk to. We all like to have someone to talk to about our day. So it's that much better if we can talk to someone who we know understands the workplace that we're talking about, the circumstances that we're talking about, the people that we're talking about. Well, a mentor is going to be able to do that, right? They're going to understand all those pieces. So this program retention, of course, is a very key element, a key goal that we would associate with most registered apprenticeship mentorship and most mentorship generally. On the same level, educational achievement, very important. How does a mentor support the process of a mentee, of a registered apprenticeship program participant learning through the course of the registered apprenticeship? Because, of course, we think of registered apprenticeships in terms of employment, as we certainly should, but so much of it, the core of registered apprenticeship, is learning. The core of registered apprenticeship is taking on new skills, is knowledge translation from existing staff to new staff coming in through this registered apprenticeship program. So, of course, we think about that from every context, from the strict classroom where we're saying, okay, someone might be doing just very straight classroom-style learning in this registered apprenticeship, all the way over to how is someone learning on the job? How is someone learning hard skills on the job? How is someone learning soft skills on the job? How is someone learning how to adapt to a work environment, to integrate themselves within that environment, and to navigate that environment in the most effective way possible? Of course, that directly translates then to employment achievement. All of that learning, all of that both hard and soft skill learning is about ensuring that someone has the capacity to really succeed within employment within the field that we're sponsoring a registered apprenticeship in. That then translates to career achievement and retention. How is someone not only going to find a job, but how are they going to find a career within this space, and how are they going to grow within that career? How are they going to feel supported to, again, not just begin the process of career, but to really progress over the course of years? Understanding that within a registered apprenticeship program, what we're hoping to do is plant seeds that extend far past the actual time in which someone's participating in a registered apprenticeship program. Yes, of course, we want that immediate employment outcome shortly after the end of a registered apprenticeship program, but we also want to imagine that as we're working with registered apprenticeship participants, as we're working with mentees, that we are opening them up to the skills that they're going to need to progress within their career for the next year, for the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and on and on and on. We hope we're setting a real foundation here. And of course, when we think about mentorship and think about making that connection between a mentor and a mentee, so much of the undefinable, the seemingly undefinable aspects of what someone is teaching, what someone is learning in that mentor-mentee relationship, so much of that is what's going to define that foundation that someone's going to work from, again, not just to achieve employment, but to achieve career development, to achieve a career pathway going forward. But now, here's where we can start to look at some considerations that, I'm assuming anyone who's thought about mentorship, thought about registered apprenticeships before, each of those pieces I just talked about, this is our bread and butter, right? These are the standard issue ideas that we have here. These are the pillars, the foundation, whatever analogy you want to use. Well, here's some ideas that we should also be thinking about when we're thinking about mentorship, because it absolutely can matter, and it absolutely should be a piece of what we're considering here. And this, again, reflects a lot of what Dr. Harris was talking about in our last session. The first is, how can we use this mentorship program? What is the role of this mentorship program when we are thinking about the inclusiveness of the registered apprenticeship program that we're sponsoring here? When we're thinking about representation within that registered apprenticeship, the extent to which we can look at, and I say that both literally and as more of an analogy. When we analyze who is participating in our registered apprenticeship program, of course, we want to see as much as possible that registered apprenticeship program, that the participants within it reflect who is in our community, and reflect the folks that constitute our community and that are represented within it. So we absolutely want to see that there. And I will say, as we were talking about the design of this whole program, this whole webinar series, rather, I should say, one of the first things that we discussed was that mentorship was such a unique piece, because we knew that as an engine of driving DEIA, driving diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, we knew that mentorship is absolutely going to be an essential strategy to drive that inclusiveness, to drive that sense of equity, to drive that belongingness, that access, all those pieces. However, we know that it can be that, but it isn't necessarily going to be that. We can't just say, well, we've got a mentorship program, and as a consequence, well, now we're more inclusive. Now there's going to be more equity. There's going to be more access. There's going to be more belonging within our program. It absolutely can be that, but we can't just say, well, we've got mentorship now, so all those things will naturally follow. Just like Dr. Harris was telling us in our last session, we have to be intentional in the way we put these things together. We have to think, okay, well, if inclusiveness is a goal, if equity is a goal, if cultivating a sense of belongingness is a goal, well, what is that going to mean for the way we structure this program? What is that going to mean for the way we recruit our mentors? What is that going to mean for the way we train them, support them in an ongoing basis? Another piece here, and I would say this falls under the same category of mentorship can absolutely achieve this goal, but we have to think about it as and we have to plan for it very intentionally, again, to ensure that it reaches this aspect of its potential, and that is mitigating re-traumatization. We know that a vast number of the folks that we're working with in registered apprenticeships, just like I should say, probably a surprisingly vast number of folks in the population generally, a vast number of our fellow citizens have experienced trauma, and as a consequence, quite possibly are continuing to experience trauma. We know this is part of folks' life experience. We know this is part of what they're arriving at our doors with when they're coming into our registered apprenticeship program, whatever their personal history, whether it's related to some aspect of their childhood, whether it's related to their military service, whether it's related to their experience in homelessness or their experience in reentry. We know that, or whether someone doesn't fall into any of those categories, and yet has nonetheless, as part of living a human life, nonetheless they have experienced trauma, and thus they continue to experience it. Well, there's a lot that mentorship can do to support, or rather to mitigate re-traumatization, to support someone who has experienced trauma in being able to engage in a registered apprenticeship program, and to ameliorate, to limit that, the influence, the impact that trauma is going to have on them because of the support and the connection of the mentor that they've been connected with. Again, it's all there. These things are very possible goals and outcomes that we can foster within our mentorship program, but they're not just going to happen naturally, right? Just as Dr. Harris was telling us, we have to be intentional in the way we put these things together. We have to be intentional in our theory of change, if you will, where we say, okay, we're going to put these aspects into the way we design our mentorship program. We're going to train our mentors on these issues. We're going to make sure our mentors are thinking about these ideas. And we're going to emphasize these aspects of the mentor-mentee relationship. And that is what those elements are, what we believe are going to translate into this mentorship program, overall mitigating the potential for re-traumatization that folks who have experienced trauma will feel, and thus, again, creating another opportunity by which our mentorship program is increasing inclusion, increasing equity, increasing access, increasing a sense of belongingness, because as we all know, if we do not, for whatever reason, if I don't feel safe in an environment, whether I am correct or incorrect in terms of my perception of whether I'm safe or not, maybe I'm in a perfectly safe environment. But if I don't feel safe, then I simply am not going to feel a sense of belonging. I'm not going to feel a sense of connection. So we've got to be thinking about all of these things when we're defining our program goals and objectives. So as we're thinking about these program design elements, as we're conducting this intentional process, here are some of the considerations that, of course, we're going to be fostering in that process. Again, first of all, one of the first things that we'll ask, over and above the educational and employment achievement aspects of our mentorship program, what are the program goals that we have for recruitment, retention, and how diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, are going to be reflected in those, going to be reflected in the way we recruit both registered apprenticeship program participants and the way we recruit our mentors. How do these ideas reflect in how folks are retained within these within the mentorship? To what extent, or within the registered apprenticeship program, rather? In what ways is the support of a mentor, connection with a mentor? In what ways is that supporting someone's sense of belongingness, and thus presumably going to be supporting their sense of supporting their retention within that program? How is that going to make sure that they're going to be able to engage with this program for a longer term? So one of the first things, of course, we want to ask at this stage is, to what extent do the demographics of our registered apprenticeship program reflect those of the community in which we operate? And again, I kind of use the shorthand here is, to what extent does our registered apprenticeship program look like the community that it's rooted in? Will we go from an understanding of that community and see it reflected within our registered apprenticeship participants, or are these going to be two very different groups of folks? If it's the latter, right, if we see a huge difference, then presumably we have some work to do in thinking about how we're going to recruit folks, and beyond just recruiting, beyond just bringing folks through the door, we then can think about, okay, what is it about the way we are going to connect our mentors and mentees, the way we're going to match mentors and mentees, as we'll speak about in a future session, the way we're going to recruit potential mentors to serve in this process. How are we going to design all of those pieces? How we're going to support our mentors? How are we going to design all of those pieces in a way that it will translate to cultivating a sense of equity, cultivating a sense of belongingness and trust and access within this program? Of course, to answer a lot of these questions as our baseline, we would want to look at our usage analysis, if we've conducted one of those recently, or if we need to conduct one of those to understand these questions better. Of course, the usage analysis, I'm not going to go into it at any great length here, but that is basically our capacity to analyze our program and say, again, to what extent does it look like the community it's rooted in? And we can define those things pretty clearly from a demographic standpoint. If you would like some more information on this, you can look at another webinar series featuring Dr. Harris and myself that is specifically on cultivating diversity and equity within registered apprenticeships generally, and you can find that at the SC Workforce Hub under resources, and then under sponsor resources. That will all be right there for you. That series will talk at great length about usage analyses and other elements that are going to help us answer these questions. So as we're digging deeper into this, as we think about our registered apprenticeship program, one of the first things we're going to need to ask is, who is going to most benefit from this mentorship program? Who needs mentorship the most in our registered apprenticeship program? That means asking which of our participants might feel uncomfortable, who might feel out of place, who might look at this registered apprenticeship program and say, hey, this doesn't look like me, this doesn't feel like me, this is not a community in which I have previously felt that I belonged. Now let's create an important distinction. We can be doing things, we can be actively, consciously doing things to make someone feel like they don't belong, right? And I think we understand that. We can be doing things to push someone away, to distance someone in an active way. Obviously, we do not want to do that. We cannot do that and foster a successful registered apprenticeship program. I'm hoping that that all of us here are in agreement on that. However, beyond what we do intentionally to try to, distance folks from our registered apprenticeship program, which again we cannot do, we do not want to do. There are a number of things that have nothing to do with intentionality that we could be doing in terms of the way we design our registered apprenticeship program, in terms of just where our registered apprenticeship program is in its growth, that are going to influence whether or not folks feel a sense of belonging. And again, these are the things that we're not intentionally trying to create distance between ourselves and a potential registered apprenticeship program participant. We're not trying to make folks feel unwelcome, and yet they may nonetheless feel that way, just based on where our program is at this time and some design elements that we might not have thought about. So we want to ask these questions on both a quote-unquote population level. We can ask ourselves, okay, as we look at this registered apprenticeship program, do we feel that transitioning service members, do we feel that veterans will be able to participate in this program and feel they belong, feel they are valued, feel that their skills translate, feel that that they can mesh within this social environment, which of course will be so different than presumably very different than their experience in the military. So we can ask that on a population level. Okay, how is this presumably going to work for this population, for this group of folks? Now that's going to entail, making some generalities, making some general assumptions about folks and about the questions that we want to ask and about how they're going to fit within within this program. And as we're asking those questions on this kind of more population level, and as we recognize that will require some degree of generalization, of course we want to ensure at every point in all of this, just like in every point of our registered apprenticeship program generally, that it shouldn't just be us asking, and when I say us in this particular example, I'll say folks who are not veterans, who did not serve in the military, who may be running a registered apprenticeship program. It's one thing for all of us to get together and say, okay, so what do we think? Is this going to be open? Is this going to be accessible? Is this going to be welcoming? That's great. That's a necessary step. The next necessary step beyond that is to then, of course, stop with the generalities and stop with the assumptions and take the next step of speaking directly with either our veteran participants, our transitioning service member participants, or other stakeholders, other folks, current employees who may have that experience and who can tell us a bit more about, okay, this is what you're not thinking about because, of course, you don't represent this community, so here's how we get beyond the generalities, here's how we get beyond the assumptions and start speaking directly with folks who have this lived experience, this lived expertise, I should say, that are going to help guide us in these program design considerations. But for all these questions that we can ask on the population level, it's also necessary to ask it on a personal level, because whenever we talk about any population, any group of human beings that we would sort under whatever demographic heading, we know that there are going to be presumably some similarities across that group, but there are going to be a lot more differences, right? Because every person of every demographic of every group, they are nonetheless still individuals. And individuals will bring considerations, concerns to the table that, of course, we can't predict. We cannot possibly predict what every individual is thinking, is feeling as they're experiencing this registered apprenticeship process. So that's when we, again, start to think on a more individual level. We can ask ourselves, all right, if we're trying to imagine Devante's experience in this, and we understand from having spoken with him in the past that he has experienced trauma while he was deployed in service, will he in this RAP feel comfortable? Will he feel welcome? Will he feel safe on a very fundamental level, which of course is one of the key, is always the key consideration that we're asking about when we're asking about trauma is, does someone feel safe? So we can drill down to that individual level and recognize that Devante's individual experience as a veteran within our registered apprenticeship program, that is going to reflect and that's going to instruct us a bit on our same questions that we ask on the population level. but it's going to take us past that. It's going to start thinking about things on a much more individual, much more direct level. And again, for all the questions and assumptions that we can make as folks who are obviously, are not Devante, are not having his personal experience, for all those assumptions and generalities that we can be making, the necessary step in all of this, of course, is to at some point in time talk to Devante, and either in a very formal way or in just an informal way. Like, hey, how you doing? How has this experience been for you? Are you enjoying this? What could we do better? What is challenging? What has been particularly easy? What's working very well? And those, by the way, are additional questions that even our mentors can help us continue to ask by having those kinds of conversations, exploring those issues of belongingness, of access within within the registered apprenticeship program that we're sponsoring. And then finally, of course, what we want to be asking, kind of boiling this all down, we want to know where the potential barriers are. So we're going to ask what specific experiences or challenges or other factors are going to make it harder for our current participants and our potential future participants to truly engage with, to access, and to feel a sense of belonging within this registered apprenticeship program that we're sponsoring. And as we begin to recognize what those possible barriers are, that's when we can begin to say, okay, so if there's a genuine sense that a number of our participants, despite our best efforts, feel that there's a potential for re-traumatization, to put that more simply, feel that there's the potential that they are unsafe here, that there could be that some of those traumatic experiences could be coming back to them as a consequence of them being working within our registered apprenticeship program. Well, if that's the case, then what do we need to do to overcome that barrier? And more specifically, when we think about mentorship, when we think about the capacity to connect Devante with a possible mentor, this is going to tell us a lot about how we want to prepare that mentor, how we want to make that match between Devante and a mentor. Is it going to be someone with a similar military background who's going to be able to say, hey, listen, I've been right where you are right now. I've had these same experiences. Here's how I got through that. Here are some things we can do to overcome some of these barriers, to ameliorate some of these potential aspects of re-traumatization. But and otherwise, fundamentally, here I am to speak with you and to support you and to show you that you are not alone in this, because by definition, I'm right here too. We've had very similar experiences. Not the same experiences. I don't understand everything you're going through, but I know enough to know that to have some sense of connection there. That might be what drives us to make a match with Devante. Or we might find that, Devante actually wants to learn a lot more about the folks he's working with now who do not have that veteran background. Devante knows all about veterans. He is a veteran. He's served in the military for a number of years. He understands all of that. What he's looking for now is a connection with someone who doesn't come from that background and maybe can help guide him a bit and support him as he explores this new environment, explores this new connection. So as we ask all these questions, I guess as that example sort of hopefully makes clear, there are no simple, immediate, automatic answers. We don't say, aha, Devante, he is a veteran. Let's match him with another veteran, and we're going to be all set. Everything's going to be great. It's certainly not that simple. It's not as simple as saying, Catherine is a black female, and we want to make sure that we have another black female to connect with her so that she feels welcome, so that we have this kind of direct connection. That may be what works very well for Catherine, but we need to know more about her. We need to ask more detailed, more nuanced questions than simply making a match on a very demographic level and assuming that simply by having kind of paired up folks on that identity level that's going to it's going to result in the change we want it to. We need to go a level deeper and ask, truly, what does Devante want to gain from this, and what do we need to provide him? What identity features of his mentor need to be there to ensure that we're going to match those goals, to ensure that we're going to meet the goals that we have in terms of supporting Devante, supporting his engagement, his access, his belongingness within our registered apprenticeship program. So again, all these questions, and I just want to emphasize again that, there are no sort of simple equations in any of this. This is again not as simple as kind of making. We're not just playing. We're not just identity matching here. We're going a level deeper than that. We're asking questions about what really someone is going to need. What essential barriers are they trying to overcome, and what are we going to do to support them through this mentorship program? That's what's going to guide us in terms of our program design elements, which, by the way, in future sessions, as you'll see, we're going to dig into each of those in much more detail. So we're going to talk about mentor recruitment. We're going to talk about mentor training. We're going to talk about matching. We're going to talk about how we conduct a mentorship session. So all those things, we're going to dive into it in much greater detail. But to really do that as effectively as we can, we have to be asking these questions first, and we have to be answering those questions in as much detail and with as much insight as we possibly can. And again, the best source of that insight will always be the folks that we're trying to serve, the folks that we're trying to support. But as we ask all those questions, as we put those design elements in place, then we have to ask the question like, okay, well, now that we've made these design choices, what are we going to do in terms of program evaluation to ensure that those choices, that the goals that we're trying to foster, that we are meeting them and that we're being as effective as possible, and that our theory of change is actually working the way we thought it would, right? So let's talk a little bit about how that evaluation piece is going to come through. So first, of course, program evaluation reflects program design. They've got to be mirror images of one another, or else we're asking questions about, we're going to end up asking irrelevant questions, and as a consequence, we're going to get irrelevant data, we're going to get irrelevant answers to our questions. So as we think about the way we're designing our evaluation, that's got to happen hand in hand. Just as we're designing the program itself, we need to be thinking about, okay, it is our theory of change. We believe that matching Devante, having another mentor available who has experience in the military, who is a veteran, we believe that matching that person with Devante is going to really best support Devante in meeting his goals, in cultivating that sense of belonging here in this mentorship. Well, how do we know whether or not that's true? How do we know whether or not we succeeded and that our theory was correct and that we are supporting Devante's engagement by making this mentorship match? So we can kind of ask this on two levels. We can both look at the process that we're going through, and we can look at, okay, to what extent do we feel that process is having the outcomes that we want it to? And that can be, again, as simple and as direct as having a conversation with Devante about what his experience with his mentor has been like. How has his connection with his mentor, Bill, how has that connection made it easier for Devante to engage in this program? How has it made him feel more comfortable, more of a sense of belonging within this program? So we can look at all those elements, but then we also have to look at some bottom line pieces of what are our outcomes here. We can ask Devante his experience, and that's going to be extremely valuable information for us. However, we certainly understand that if Devante drops out of the registered apprenticeship program altogether, that clearly there was some kind of barrier somewhere along the way. We know that if Devante really struggles with the classroom training aspect of his registered apprenticeship program, and that the mentorship connection isn't having any kind of positive effect on that. We don't see any difference between when Devante first started working with his mentor and when he's been working with him for 3 months. We don't see any difference in that knowledge attainment, in that education piece of the mentorship. Those outcomes, that's going to be our very clear indication of success or failure. Now, again, we don't know, we can't necessarily make direct correlations. There might be a number of different reasons why Devante would have dropped out of our registered apprenticeship program, or is struggling with the educational piece of it. There could be a number of reasons for that. It may or may not have anything to do with our mentorship. However, knowing those bottom line outcome pieces is totally, of course, absolutely essential to our understanding the effectiveness of these programs. Again, just as we talked about all throughout this session, we'll say it again. we begin this process with the end in mind. We think about mentorship with, okay, what are we hoping to achieve? What are the goals that we are hoping to foster here? So we begin with that. Like, what we hope is going to be the case is that Devante, his sense of engagement and belongingness and comfort within this mentorship is going to increase, or within this registered apprenticeship is going to increase based on his mentor connection. Our theory is that his educational attainment is going to increase with the support of a mentor who's really going to work with him when he's struggling on some things, be able to answer some questions, be able to give another perspective on this information. That's all of our theory. That's what we want to be the case. That's what we want the end to be. So just as we're asking those questions in our design pieces, we're also asking those questions, considering those questions when we're considering how we design our evaluation. And we're fundamentally asking, we're essentially saying, again, this was our theory. This was our goal. This was our hope in putting things together the way we did. Well, did it work? Did our stated goal become achieved based on the work that we did, or are we still missing a piece, or are there other aspects that we need to consider here? And then finally, an awareness of the places, the spaces, both the physical and the overall intellectual, emotional, social space within which all this occurs. And understanding and awareness of that is absolutely essential. So we ask questions like, how does DEIA contribute to and inform the outcomes we seek? How is mentorship reflective of that? How is mentorship pushing forward ideas of equity, of access, of inclusion, and of an overall sense of diversity within our organization? How is mentorship playing into that? And again, we had our theory that we thought that mentorship would play this role. Well, do we see that in the data? Do we see that reflected in how we're considering this process? And again, how is mentorship either contributing to or failing to contribute to and informing the outcomes that we ultimately seek? Of course, those are all the pieces that, just as we thought about them in terms of the program design, we think about them in that corollary, hand-in-hand aspect of how do we think about this evaluation as we're putting all this together as well. So, of course, evaluation is going to explore a specific program element in light of their purpose in the overall program, and that purpose again will be defined by all these questions we've asked thus far. We know, if we go back to our goals, we know that every mentorship within a registered apprenticeship program is going to have an educational component, an employment component, a workplace social component. We know all those pieces. Did we also have DEIA goals that we wanted to accomplish? Do we also have trauma-related goals that we want to accomplish? Well, we need to, again, as we've said, consider all of that in terms of how it's going to reflect in both the program and the evaluation. This means that we are going to, at the outset, we're defining our goals, but we want to define those. I'm sure folks have heard of the notion of SMART goals, of goals that are very clear, that are very specific, that are measurable, that are attainable, but that we know, okay, this is our goal, this is how we see this program element playing out, and here is what it will look like in a very clearly definable way. Here's what it will look like if we're successful. Here's what the numbers will look like if it's successful. Here is what Devante's reported experience will presumably look like if we are successful in supporting him with mentorship in the right way. And here's how we know when we're off, when the numbers are off, or when aspects of our process evaluation are off. Here's how we'll know that there's that discrepancy and the need that we need to address as a consequence. And we can also pan back away from this, and this is kind of an aspect that we should always be keeping in mind when we're considering anything related to DEIA. DEIA is about individuals and their sense of inclusion within our organization. However, it goes beyond that. It means that we need to consider the overall group of folks that we have who are participating in our registered apprenticeship program, who are our employees generally, who are our participants, who are our partners. Do Do all of those folks, are all of those folks able to report feeling a greater sense of understanding and connection to their coworkers? Even if we wouldn't think of, okay, we're gonna ask Cori and Fred about their experiences. Maybe we don't think about Cori and Fred's experiences through a DEIA lens necessarily, but nonetheless, all of this should have the effect of the rising tide, raising all boats, right? This should have a positive effect on the overall community of our registered apprenticeship program, of our employment as a whole, and everyone should be feeling that. Not, of course, we can't talk about individual belonging purely on an individual level, right? An individual belongs in a social setting. That means they belong within that entire social network. And everyone has to feel that to a certain extent. Everyone has to be able to see and report that to a certain extent, or else we know it's not being as impactful, as successful as it could be. And then finally, how are we modeling this mentorship program? How are we cultivating this mentorship program so that, again, it's contributing to these performance indicators, and that we're really seeing that reflection there in the reality of our day-to-day, so that we can see it on an evaluation level, but we can also see it on just a real fundamental level of, we see these aspects of DEIA, we see these aspects of learning and belongingness and employment achievement and a sense of safety and a sense of connection and a sense of access and a sense of inclusion. We see all that both within our specific programs, but then again, within that larger social set, that larger social connection that is there within the population of folks we have, again, both as registered apprenticeship participants and as employees, partners, participants as a whole. So, an example we can do this that we can look at here to kind of drill into this a bit more. So if our mentorship program, if we started out saying, okay, the goal here, what we hope to achieve is to increase classroom success and resiliency. That's what we want to be fostering primarily through our mentorship program. So if that's our primary goal, and those of course are very good goals, and they're not exclusive, I should say, of other goals. We can have that goal and have the very much correlated goal of increasing DEIA and decreasing the possibility of re-traumatization. All those things go hand in hand. But if we're saying, okay, well, our number one goal was to increase that classroom success, increase resiliency within the classroom. Again, that would be a student's capacity to fundamentally stick with it when challenges come up, to stick with it when they're feeling like, wow, I haven't been in a classroom in a very, very long time, and this is unfamiliar to me, and tests are unfamiliar to me, and I'm not comfortable with any of this stuff. Well, despite that discomfort, can I, with the support of my mentor, with the support of my instructors, with the support of my the fellow registered apprenticeship participants, can I stick it out nonetheless, overcome those challenges? We know that those challenges will occur, and that someone's ability to, that resiliency, that ability to ride those challenges out and overcome them is going to be absolutely necessary to their success. So, and as we asked in this first question here, we might want to go so far as to further define exactly what that resiliency means. Now, we might see it in grades and retention rates, passing rates. We say, okay, well, Devante's got, very good grades here. He's passing everything. All the numbers look right. So that's a good sign, right? That tells us that we're moving in the right direction. But maybe if we were to actually talk to Devante and talk about what his experience was like, maybe we would hear that his resiliency was being tested to a much greater extent than we would have thought otherwise, and that there were other things we could have done to cultivate more resiliency with Devante from the outset, so that he didn't have quite as steep a hill to overcome in this process. So we'd want to ask specifically, what does that look like? Not just in terms of our grades, our retention rates, our passing rates, all those good numbers that we love to have, but also when I talk to Devante, what do I want to hear his experience was? What do I want him to what am I hoping he's going to tell me about the program that we've put together that's going to tell me that, okay, yes, we are moving towards success. Now, presumably we don't, our bar for success is not going to be that Devontae says, oh, I didn't feel challenged at all. This was a breeze. I barely had to pay attention. I just zipped right through this. There were no problems at all. Probably we want someone to feel that there was a sense of challenge. The whole idea of learning, of registered apprenticeships, is building up some strengths, building up some knowledge, and that's a challenging process. The question is, was it too challenging? Was it unnaturally challenging? Did we put Devontae in a position where he really had to overcome more than was necessary? More than just the process of growth within the learning and registered apprenticeship program, we were asking him to overcome challenges far beyond that because we didn't think enough about what would support his resiliency, what would, again, support his sense of access, belongingness, inclusion within this classroom, within the registered apprenticeship program as a whole. And then finally, this is going to bring us back to defining exactly what effective mentorship is for us. We can define that in broad strokes, in generalities, for almost any mentorship program. But for us, based on our goals, based on the goals of our program, what does mentorship look like? What should it be achieving? And do we see that, again, both reflected in all those great numbers, but also reflected in when we talk to people formally or informally about their experience, when we talk to people about both the mentor, the mentee, other participants, other employees, other stakeholders, when we talk to folks, we see these our goals being reflected, and we see movement toward accomplishing those goals reflected in what we are hearing from the folks we're speaking with. So again, another example here when we think about mentorship and representation. From a program design element, we would say the following. Okay, we have Black female participants in a STEM-oriented registered apprenticeship program are paired with Black female professionals in that field. We can imagine the goal behind that. The goal behind that is to say, okay, we have folks who may not initially feel as much belonging as we want them to in this process. They may not look at the rest of our registered apprenticeship program. They may not look at this overall field and see themselves reflected to the extent that we would want to be the case. So because that's the case, when we look at this overall field, some of our participants don't see themselves represented and reflected the way we want them to. Well, we're going to take the step of making a conscious match here that's going to say, someone else with your experience, someone else with similar background, someone else with a similar perspective, someone else with similar ideas of identity and personhood within this context. Well, we're going to pair those folks up so that we're really, excuse me putting it this way, that we're almost like we're bootstrapping that representation by making sure that someone has a direct connection with someone who they feel reflects their identity within this field and can support them in facing a number of the challenges that they will likely face based on the fact that the field as a whole maybe does not represent them as much as it could, as it should, as it hopefully will as this process continues. Continuing with our program design, our idea is that time and mentorship is going to include discussions of specific challenges faced by the mentor in their career. It's going to include very specific discussions of their sense of belongingness, of their sense of achievement, of their sense of access to and inclusion within this field. That is the challenge that we're looking to face. And of course, that is going to, when we think about how we're going to both match a mentor and how we're going to support that mentor to conduct a mentorship session, these issues are going to be front and center. We're going to very intentionally make sure that that is the case here. Again, mentor training, as Dr. Harris spoke about so eloquently in our last session. The mentor we're supporting here, we're not just saying, oh, well, you are a Black female professional in this field, and this participant is a Black female participant in this STEM-oriented registered apprenticeship program, and we're just going to assume that based on those similarities, you're going to figure this out, and you're going to make these connections, and you're going to be able to discuss these challenges, and you're going to be able to cultivate this sense of inclusion, of equity, of belongingness. No, we're not just going to assume that. We know the value of those identity pieces, and we know the value, the potential value of this connection. But as we've said time and time again, if we want to capitalize on that value, maximize that value, we are going to make it intentional. We are going to very, very carefully weave it into our program here by, in this case, training this mentor to ensure that she is properly equipped to support the mentor that we're connecting her with, that she understands the best practices in mentorship. Now, we got to keep in mind, of course, this person knows all kinds of stuff about STEM, knows all kinds of stuff about this profession, certainly knows all kinds of stuff about what it means to be the person that she is within this profession. None of that necessarily automatically translates to knowing how to mentor someone to convey all of that information, to support them with that information as best they can. Mentorship is a technical skill. That's why we train mentors, and we've got to think about that from a program design aspect. If our goal is to cultivate this sense of belongingness, well, this is what we've got to do to make sure we do that well. So the flip side, again, as we're looking at our program evaluation, when we speak with our students, when we speak with this student particularly, and with our students generally, do they report feeling a greater sense of comfort and control in their career path? Did they come in feeling like, wow, this is new. I don't know if I belong here. I don't know if this is my place yet. And after this process, after this registered apprenticeship, after this, as a consequence of this mentorship, they've come to see that, no, wait, you know what? I do belong here. This is my space. This is a place for me. And to the extent that I don't feel it is yet, I'm going to make it that with this support and with the achievements, with the work that I'm doing here, with the achievements that I'm creating for myself. Do the mentors. We're, of course, talking with our mentors as well in evaluation. As Dr. Harris said, a mentorship is a relationship. We can't understand a relationship by looking at the one side of it. We've got to understand both. So we ask our mentors, do they report a sense of comfort and clarity in their role in the areas they've been asked to support the student in? Does this mentor feel like, yes, I understand that a big piece of my role, in addition to the education, in addition to the formal skills, the hard skills, and all that support, a piece of my role here is to ensure that this mentee, that this participant feels like they belong. And I understood that was part of the goal of the work that I was here to do, and I understood what I was supposed to do to achieve that, and I was comfortable within it. And by the way, yes, I saw that. I saw from the first time that I worked with my mentee to after a year of a strong and ongoing organic relationship, I see the change in them. I see the change in their comfort. I see the change in how they're talking about both the work environment and themselves and their place within it. I see all that, and I can report on it. And then finally, of course, we want our hard data. Does data collected before and after the introduction of the mentorship program reflect that increased retention? Does it reflect that we hope means? And again, we can't assume too much about exactly what numbers mean. Numbers are usually going to tell us more about where we're lacking than necessarily where we're strong. But we hope certainly that there is a connection between retention and a sense of belongingness. We know that if there is a huge drop-off in retention, that almost certainly reflects a lack of a sense of belongingness. So we hope the corollary is true, that sense that, okay, yes, we are seeing retention. That means that we've helped to cultivate that sense of belongingness and comfort for folks. Particularly as we look at these numbers, do we see the success rates reflected in the experience of our Black female students, our Black female participants? Another example that we can look at here. We talked a little bit before about a trauma-informed approach and how that might look. And again, this we know about mentorship as it applies to educational achievement, employment achievement, learning new skills, making those social connections. We get all that. As we begin to dig deeper and look at the DEIA issues, of which, in my opinion, trauma is an essential piece of that puzzle. Not the only piece of the puzzle by any stretch of the imagination, but it is certainly an essential piece of that puzzle because we know that a large number of the folks we're working with, as I said, have experienced trauma and carry that with them as they're engaging with our apprenticeship program, as they're engaging with our program as a whole. So what are our design elements? What is our theory of change here? Well, we're going to say, first of all, for our mentorship program specifically, we're going to train our mentors on trauma-informed approaches. We're going to train them on what it needs and what we need to do to avoid re-traumatization, to support someone, again, in cultivating a sense of safety, in cultivating a sense that yes, I am safe here. That is, that I can fundamentally trust that is the case. A huge piece, one of the most important aspects of cultivating that sense of safety, of avoiding re-traumatization, is cultivating that sense of personal control and agency within this organization, within this program. If I feel that I control my environment to some extent, that I can predict my environment, that I know what's going to happen, that if I'm uncomfortable within my environment, I have the power to say, okay, time out. I need to distance myself from this environment in a planned and safe and planful way, but I still need to step aside and go to a place that I feel safe, and we'll come back to addressing what caused me to feel unsafe, what caused that re-traumatization. We'll come back and address that later on, but right now I just need to be somewhere else. I need to control my environment. I need to control who I'm surrounded with. I need to control the stimuli that I'm experiencing. That sense of personal control and knowing that I have agency, knowing that I have control and influence, those things are extremely, extremely essential in terms of avoiding that re-traumatization, cultivating that notion of safety. Of course, we're also going to think about cultivating resiliency and coping methods here as well. Trauma is one of those things we can predict as much as we can. We can do as much as we can to cultivate a trauma-informed environment, to cultivate trauma-informed staff and program and services and mentorship and all these other pieces. Fundamentally, however, we know that we're going to also need to support a mentee or a program participant to cultivate their own sense of resiliency, to develop their own coping methods, so that when the inevitable occurs, i.e. when someone does not feel safe, when some possibility of re-traumatization arises, that the individual has the tools to the greatest extent possible to respond to that and cope with that. And we're going to look at what we can do to train our mentors to not become clinicians, right? We're not turning folks into psychological level counselors. We're just saying, as mentors, here is your role in cultivating that. Here is your role in helping someone build up these tools, build up this resiliency. We know that the next piece of our program design here will say we're going to select our mentors in part based on their shared background with participants, their shared background in this regard. So maybe that trauma came from military service. Well, if that is what someone identifies with and that's important to them, we can make that match. We do have folks who have experienced homelessness and the transition out of homelessness. We do have folks who have experienced incarceration and the transition out of that. And we will look at if they are the most appropriate folks to match someone with, to support them if they feel that trauma and that necessity of avoiding re-traumatization, if those are some of the most important aspects to them. We're going to make sure that we can match folks, make those connections. So if those are our program design elements, then our program evaluation elements, we're just going to make sure, in this process, are our students given regular opportunities? I would almost say ubiquitous, constant opportunities to express their challenges and their needs in relations to trauma, and again, their perceptions of belonging, of comfort, of inclusion within these processes. In that process of and again, the way I was saying that's both a data gathering tool that we always want folks to feel comfortable making those expressions to us, of course, but that's also a programmatic tool. On a fundamental, how do I cultivate good trauma-informed approaches? Well, that's the control piece, right? Knowing that I can raise my voice and express my perspective and express my concerns, express maybe some re-traumatization or some lack of safety, a feeling of a lack of safety that I'm experiencing. If I know I'm safe to express that, if I know that part of the process is I can say that and talk about that. Well, that's going to up my sense of, yeah, I have control here. I belong here. I am safe here. So this element of our program evaluation is also an absolutely essential element of the program design. So we see how these things relate. But moving on there, in addition to those personal reflections for both mentors and mentees, we're also going to ask, do we see retention data reflecting this? Do we, the folks that we understand came to us having experienced these things, do we see that they have as strong a retention rate as anyone else in our program does? If that's the case, then we assume that, okay, we're moving in the right direction. If it's definitely not the case, if there's a huge disparity between the folks that we've identified as having experienced trauma and having expressed that as a concern for them, if we know that folks in that group are not achieving retention at the rate that everyone else is, then we know we've got a challenge that we have to address. We have to go back to that program design and say, okay, what are we missing here? What have we not? What circle have we not squared? What pieces have we not put together that are going to make this work? And again, as you know, we always say, the best source of data for this is always going to be our participants themselves, to say, okay, when was it? What was it? Under what circumstances was it that you did not feel that sense of safety that we want you to feel, did not feel that sense of belonging, of inclusiveness, of inclusion that we expect you absolutely have the right to feel as a part of this registered apprenticeship program? So again, all of these pieces coming back together, we understand the value of that ability to report my experience. That is a great tool to avoid re-traumatization because it ups my sense of control. It helps me control the way I navigate through this process, but it's also going to help us from an evaluation standpoint. It's going to provide that insight that we need to turn around and continue to improve these services, continue to improve this experience for the folks that we're supporting. Okay. So that was a summary there. Now, I will say, and you're going to see this right here in front of us as we look at what to expect in future webinars. As I said before, we're going to drill down into each of these programmatic elements that constitute the registered apprenticeship, mentorship, and really look at how do they, you know, what are the program design elements? How do they all fit together? And how do they reflect some of these questions that we've been asking in the course of these first two sessions? So for sessions 3 and 4, we're going to talk about recruiting and matching mentors. Who are the folks that we're bringing in? Where are we bringing them in from? How are we connecting with them? How are we engaging with them? And then how are we making those choices? How are we being guided to make the best possible matching choice for the mentor and the mentee, and what's guiding those decisions for us, and of course for the mentors and mentees themselves. And then for sessions 5 and 6, we're going to continue that process of looking at a very micro level at these program elements, and we're going to ask about what it means to conduct an effective mentorship session. Like, what does that meeting look like? What does that time spent look like? And how do we maximize its value? And then how do we, you know, we love retention, but we want growth, right? We want advancement. So how are we going to not just support the status quo, support these programs moving forward? How are we going to support the growth of this program? How are we going to support the growth of the relationships within it that constitute it? So we'll be diving into all of that in the course of the next 4 sessions here in the course of the rest of this series. So finally, as we always do, I want to close by reminding you about some of the other great resources we have here. You can always reach out to our entire group of subject matter experts through the SCA Workforce Hub email address, scaworkforcehub@manhattanstrategy.com. You can check out the SC Workforce Hub website, scworkforcehub.com. All the great resources, all that kind of good stuff is on there, including the capacity to sign up for our newsletter, which you see sort of represented here over on the right-hand side. If that looks like something really cool that you'd like to be able to take home with you, well, don't worry, we can make that happen. You can go to that website, you can sign up for that newsletter, it's all yours. You can also access a lot of other resources and information on both our past and upcoming events. That includes the session that we referenced earlier, the session that Dr. Harris and I did on the fundamentals of DEIA and the way we gather data in our registered apprenticeship programs. And then finally, you can follow us on all kinds of different social media. You've got your LinkedIn, you've got your Facebook, you have got your social media platform, formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. So we encourage you to connect with all of those. And on behalf of Dr. Harris and the whole team here at the SCA Workforce Hub, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your engagement. Please reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to speak with you, and we look forward to speaking with you again in future sessions. Thanks very much.